By loading up in transition against the New York Knicks in Game 6, the Pacers are now transitioning to the NBA Finals for the first time in a quarter century. In the end, the Pacers advanced with a quintessential team win that mirrored the course of their season. Pascal Siakam carried early. Andrew Nembhard changed the course of the game with his defense at the point of attack, as well as in the gaps, and Haliburton, after quietly dictating pace in the background, loudly punctuated his play during closing time as a star, punching his ticket to the NBA Finals by punching the ball ahead of himself. Here to discuss how the Pacers advanced by quite literally advancing is once again my longtime co-host, my favorite basketball talker, my favorite basketball writer, Samson Folk.
Caitlin, I'm in a great place right now. I had an absolutely fantastic time covering last night's game, watching last night's game. It was a lot of things we focused on coalesced. This podcast has given a lot of words to Andrew Nembhard's defense, a lot to Tyrese Haliburton's adaptability and ability to be an offensive engine, and Pascal Siakam's skeleton keyness. And those three things are what sent them to the finals more than anything else. And they, like, Pascal really dominated that first half, as you said. Nembhard completely flipped the script on the Brunson matchup. And Tyrese did. It seemed like it was closing time, but like the Knicks had a puncher's chance until Tyrese killed them in drop. It was such an impressive run of play from all three. And they're a team, and a damn good one. Our finals team. Hello, Indiana, for the first time in a quarter century. I don't know if you know this, but my first year in no, just kidding. Fun game. Really good. And I ate a creamsicle.
It's true. It's probably what put him over the top, to be honest. But I've come to accept the fact that you'll eat creamsicles because you like them, even though that I don't accept them as part of the popsicle family. But that's all right. But that is why I put what I put in my little intro spiel there, that for people who watched the Pacers' trajectory the whole season, it really was Pascal Siakam carrying this team and they're really going. Him being an all-star, Andrew Nembhard getting healthy midway through the year. And as you wrote in your piece, and as I wrote in my bigger piece about why the defense turned around, he really did fix the Pacers in certain respects. And last night, that very first possession when Aaron Nesmith's guarding Brunson on clearly a limited ankle and he gets all the way to the rim with his left hand, I was like, somebody else is going to have to fill this void because it's not going to be Aaron Nesmith tonight. Andrew Nembhard definitely delivered on that front. And then, just as was with the close of the season for the Pacers, Tyrese playing at an all NBA level, the same in this game as well. So that's pretty much how I've divvied up what we're going to look at in this game. Hopefully people like watching a lot of highlights. I hope that there'll be a little bit of explanation to make the highlights cooler with what we're going to talk about, but it is going to be a highlight-heavy podcast.
Can I tell you something?
Yeah.
Quickly, anytime I was watching a highlight, I always was like, this would be cooler if someone was explaining this. That's a joke. It's a joke. I'm excited to explain them.
Sometimes they are cooler when people point out
Agreed.
Things that you might have missed, Samson.
Yes.
Don't know. But starting with Pascal Siakam, Eastern Conference Finals MVP Pascal Siakam.
Wait, let's talk about that a little bit.
Okay.
Because I think that's a hot topic. Do you think...
Is it a hot topic?
I think, yeah. So I'll say quickly, I probably, if I had a vote, it would have gone to Tyrese.
Mine would have too.
However, I thought that Pascal Siakam, this is kind of like in the MLB, a lot of times, like there'll be an MVP 1 and MVP 2, and they'll look at that MVP 2 season and say, this could have won a lot of other years. And I feel that way about like both of those. I thought that Pascal was sublime. And I thought he turned around like the Karl-Anthony Towns stuff significantly. He answered so much there. And like, there's a reason they went to him for the first action out of each half. And they're like, we need to work this here. But I mean, Tyrese, I know he had a quiet game in game 5 and like, but damn.
Siakam did too.
Yeah. Not as quiet in the box score though, of course. Right. And yeah. And they both carried different lineups too. I thought they both did such a tremendous job with their respective, because like obviously Toppin killed it to end the game. But Toppin had a couple really rough stretches where he was tanking starters plus Toppin. And Pascal also, like, McConnell wasn't always, fantastic. Mathurin wasn't always fantastic, just like taking those bench lineups and making them work. And then both of them, when they're on the court together, just awesome. And it's funny, Pascal was like, I didn't even know this award existed.
I think that for me, my vote would have gone to Tyrese as well. And that's probably somewhat a philosophy thing for me, similar to where I would go with all-star voting at times. And that if everything seems equal, like if in your mind, Pascal and Tyrese were both up and down at certain points in the series for different reasons, I usually go to the player who requires more game planning first. And certainly Tyrese is the player, especially over these last 2 or 3 games, who the Knicks were aiming to take out of the action more than Pascal. That being said, I also think there's probably some degree of recency bias. I don't want that to sound harsh, but Pascal was tremendous in this basketball game. So if you're sitting there watching game 6 with the Pacers clinching it at home, I can totally understand why the vote might have tilted in that direction. And he did have one of his, as you said, because you've covered all of his playoff games, one of his, if not his best playoff game ever in this series. Of course, Tyrese also had a historic triple-double. I think I probably would have been fine with it going either way. I'm not going to make it some big controversy. If I had voted, I would have voted for Tyrese, though.
Yeah. It's there's also like game 5, you know, you and I had different takeaways about Pascal's whether it's effort, impact, whatever. I guess probably a couple of the people who voted Pascal probably were leaning more my way for game 5 too. And then that probably played into it as well. It's just like Kyle Lowry in game 1 of his finals run scored 0 points. And like Kyle Lowry was the second best player on his finals team, but like you score low points, people really, they penalize you for it. But like, I don't know. They're ahead of the finals.
That's a good place to transition, because I was just going to bring that up, that I was a bit harsher on Pascal after game 5 than you were. And I am not at all insinuating that I have anything to do with why Pascal played better basketball in this game. I want to make that clear. But everything that I nitpicked him about, he totally turned the narrative back on me and was like,
He's
look,
tuned in.
I fixed all of these things. It was a really tremendous game from him. So that's where I want to start, is with Pascal. So as you mentioned, it stood out to me as well as to you. I think we both tweeted this at the exact time, that the Pacers opening set was a play for Pascal, with Aaron setting that down screen for Pascal to get it over at the elbow area extended so that they could go into inverted pick and roll against New York's 2 weakest defenders, being Cat and Jalen Brunson. And I had said on the prior show, you know, Siakam is now drawing the weakest assignment on the floor in terms of his ability to actually go at that matchup versus how limited Nesmith was in the last, 1.5 games versus Jalen Brunson, especially now that OG Anunoby's been guarding Nembhard. So, you can kind of see the issues for the Knicks here. Brunson's trying to show and recover. Nesmith slipping back to the basket. Karl Anthony Towns is in incongruent coverages with Jalen Brunson. Really easy slip feed to Nesmith. The Pacers go back to that exact same play to start the second half to poke at Karl Anthony Towns.
Can I just say
yeah,
quickly? You tweeted at 8:08 p.m. I tweeted at 8:07 p.m. So copier.
But the Pacers went to the same action at a halftime. Difference being is Siakam had done enough damage in the first half that the Knicks put Mitchell Robinson onto Siakam and cross-matched Cat over to Miles. So the hedge and recover looks a little bit different between Brunson and Mitchell Robinson than it did against Cat. But what I like from Siakam, again, going back to things that I said on the prior podcast, he keeps playing. So it's a handoff to Tyrese off of 2 double ball screens effectively. Keeps playing again, goes and sets another screen for Tyrese against Jalen Brunson, and then pick and pop, shoots over the top of the veer switch. It's like you said, a lot of skeleton key things going on between those 2 plays. This is a special that the Pacers have been running clear back since the Sabonis, Miles Turner, Karis LeVert, Malcolm Brogdon, TJ Warren era. In fact, I clipped like every time they ran this that season, and despite some of the purgatorialness of that core, this is a very, very effective play that the Pacers run with this ghost slip, swinging it back into a step-up screen. And you could see it early on when Pascal was still being guarded by Cat. They were definitely using him as a screener a lot more often in this game than what was the case in Game 5 when he set a total of 10 screens. Back to the pick and pop again, with Cat just playing way too far off. Cat's defense in this game was kind of tragic at numerous points. This is a flashback to Game 5 when I was like, look, Landry Shamet cut off TJ. The 45 cut's been taken away. Like, Pascal has to move. TJ attacking. Pascal is moving, and he's finishing on the cut with a foul. Didn't get the and one, but did draw the contact. Iverson screen. TJ's trying to get Siakam the better matchup against McBride. They don't give it up. Stays OG. Goes screen for Nembhard. Pascal gets it back against OG Anunoby. And this is a very small nerdy thing, but I do want to point it out that Pascal goes into the handoff, again, continuing to play, getting to the next action. And not only does he go into the basic handoff, which some of the stuff when I lightly talked about Miles in the last game and was like, he's not Domantas Sabonis as far as his ability to change sides of the court and actually create space with contact. One of my biggest pet peeves for handoff operators is when they go directly at the player they're handing it off to instead of dribbling at the player, the defender. So you can see Siakam taking a much harsher angle to actually basically pin in and create an advantage out of the handoff for Obi Toppin to then go to the top and knock down yet another three with Cat being pinned in there. So that was a detail that I wanted to point out. And then if you want to hop in on any of that, you can. But like his defensive effort was also like Herculean against Cat in this game as well.
It's very cathartic because as I've said before and as we talked about, like Siakam's exit in Toronto was weird, and I definitely I don't want to. The Raptors fans have been unbelievably supportive, like shouting positive reinforcement from the outside, like yes, that's our guy. But he had a really weird exit because that team was so shrouded in all that kind of stuff, and his defensive effort was definitely lower there. He played slower. The version of the player that he is in Indiana is such an incredible marriage of all of his skills, all of the things that were tied to effort, latent abilities that hadn't shown up because of play style, and then also just the defensive stuff. Because Pascal Siakam, on average over his career, has been such a switchable, extremely effective defender who answers a lot of questions. It's like we talked about with, I can't remember what conversation it was, but I've brought this up before. PD Webb says the modern power forward has to be like God. You have to do everything on a basketball court if you want to be a good power forward. And in this game, he was just so impressive. He was on the mark in every aspect of what they asked of him: screening, creating out of a standstill, inverted actions, lining up across from an all-NBA center who ran roughshod over every other matchup except for you. And you, for the however many games in a row, had great success. And yes, he had the help of the help came earlier. The doubles were more on time, but there's some straight up stuff where he was just so much better playing Cat to his weaknesses. And there's a reason Cat shouted him out during his press conference, was like, that guy's great. He's incredible. He was absolutely sublime. It's very proud watching him, having covered him for years.
I mean, and just to reinforce, and this isn't me trying to be on the negative side of things, but when he first got traded to Indiana, he had one or two games where it was like, oh, the Soul tax has been paid. Like the energy is back up. And then after a while, headed into the All-Star break, I legitimately had some concerns about what the defense looked like. They were having to experiment with a lot of different roles with him. The 4-5 action stuff between he and Miles, I was like, I'm not sure there's a clear solution here. Some of the off-ball stuff was quite poor at times. There was one or two games where I'm not exaggerating when I say that he was the worst defender on the floor for both teams. But then this season started, and slowly, it got better and better and better until you're now seeing what his overall impact has been. He and Nembhard had one of the best defensive games that I've watched from an Indiana Pacer last night, which we'll get to. But Siakam would have been just as impressive. I would have had millions of clips of him on Twitter this morning, if not for what Nembhard was doing against Brunson. So he's made a lot of strides with his individual defense. He made a lot of strides with his team defense. And I think some of that does go back to, he finally did have a full training camp with the Indiana Pacers. Their scheme is very different than what he was doing in Toronto. He worked very hard to master angles. His lateral size matters a lot for them. So all of that showed up in this game. Like you said, there were times where, some of the doubling and help that they were showing Cat was better than in prior contests, but some of it was just better hand activity from Siakam, better overall coverage one-on-one against Karl Anthony Towns from Siakam than what we had seen in the prior games. Because here the double's even late from TJ, and he's still, swiping it off of Cat and getting down.
This is, this is the one. I was actually going to talk about this. He and Drew there that's
tremendous.
That's unbelievable defense. That's the kind of defense that makes the other team think there is no solve on the floor. Like it's seamless in its switch. It's aggressive. It eats space. It forces you into negative dribbles. It forces you into passing like these little lollygag passes just to escape things. It's like that defense from those two, and it's obviously very meaningful that they were the best defenders on the floor last night. I guess OG is definitely in there as well, but man, man alive, that's a great possession.
Yeah, that's the exact timing of the double you want from Andrew, and then he also takes away the clear cut from
Mm-hmm.
Josh Hart, so that it ends up being a shot clock violation. And that's to point out, which we will get to, but like even before Andrew got put on to Brunson, he was also very good in the role that he's occupied throughout this series in terms of his off-ball defense. But this a lot better hand activity from Siakam, even when some of the blow-bys were there. This is just a straight-up isolation, and he does a good job. You know, Cat was going to his preferred left there, Samson, as you know.
Cat definitely has weaknesses in his game, but you cannot overlook for a second that Pascal is giving up at least 20 pounds, if not like 30, 35. And that you just have to look at, and we won't because it's low lights, but you just have to look at the Turner Cat matchup. And then once you look at the Siakam stuff, then you're like, oh, hell yeah, dude. This is actually
We did
really,
look
really
at the
impressive.
low lights in the last podcast. If people want to go back and look at the 10 drives where he wasn't forced to pass and he either scored or got fouled on pretty much all of them, feel free. But this is like what I'm talking about with the lateral size. Like he can actually, dig down on this drive from Karl Anthony Towns and
Yep.
swipe the ball loose like a scythe. And it doesn't matter. Like he can cheat in ways that the Pacers weren't able to do when they were still starting Aaron Nesmith at the 4 and Obi
And that
Toppin
was
at the
right
4.
after he checked back in. Like they had that, the Knicks had that run. Siakam checked out, and then boom, immediately comes back in and gets his paws on that dig, just like going backwards, slapping it loose, getting a run out. Not every single time a guy wins minutes can you say like, oh my God, everything they did on the floor was really the reason they won minutes. But Pascal in that game, I think he and Drew were both at plus 25. I think Tyrese was at plus 24. All three of those guys at the end of this game, you're like, they killed everything they possibly could to win their minutes. And you can attach the minutes winning to all the plays they made on the court. It was so tangible. Sometimes it's quiet, and all three of those guys do quiet things, but they were all triumphantly loud in this game. It was unbelievable.
And this is just absolutely suffocating. This
Mm-hmm.
might be one of the most memorable possessions of this series when
Yeah.
people look back at it. That amount of pressure there. The Knicks are still not even into their first action, and there's 8 seconds on the clock.
When we were doing the preview podcast, and we're talking with Benji and DJ, and they were saying, "Well, have Hart bring it up or have Hart do stuff," and I was like, "They might just like they'll press him."
They'll
And
press
as you
everybody.
said, yeah, they'll press everybody. And as you said, like Pascal taking on not just like the low man role to snuff out actions, but also like playing better in isolation, playing driving angles better, but also like he picks up and like every once in a while he'll get beat. We watched
It wasn't
and talked
tenable
about
last year. Like in the series against Boston, it was not tenable because there was matchups where tellingly, again, like as a compare and contrast, he was
yeah,
not guarding Tatum and Brown for a lot of that series, especially after Tyrese was out in games 3 and 4. They put him on Drew, and then because he was on Drew, Drew was, bringing the ball up, and Siakam was giving up really easy odd man advantages at times, as was Obi Toppin. Like this is like night and day from that.
mhm. It's like a hell of a game and a hell of a series, His stats to what he ended up with, like 25, 5 and 3, and he averaged like 2 stocks per game. His true shooting percentage was 60%. And like there were a couple high scoring games in this series, but 60% true shooting isn't any longer the hallmark of like truly elite offensive production. It goes as high as like 64 and up, which is insane. But he was like note perfect on the mark.
The other special defender in this game, because I am going to pay extra attention to what Andrew Nembhard did, because as I told you ahead of the pod and as I just mentioned, I think in my time covering the Pacers, that was the best individual defensive performance that I've ever seen, at least in a playoff game. And I watched Paul George have some really special defensive performances against the Miami Heat, against DeMar DeRozan and the Toronto Raptors. I watched Victor Oladipo
All
have
right.
a
I
lot of really
know
special
you.
defensive performances throughout, especially the year when he was both all NBA and all defense in his breakout season in 2017-18. And I really truthfully do think that this tops them all because he was playing both of the roles that he needed to have in this series. A lot of people are like, well, why wasn't he guarding Brunson from the start? I'm like, because for one, he wasn't defending Brunson at the level that he did in game 6 and games 1 through 5, but also because they valued him so much in the gaps and what his off-ball defense was, which is what we showed in prior podcast episodes. And this game, when Aaron comes out and clearly is limited mobility-wise to the point where Brunson has a straight line drive to his left hand, you've got to turn somewhere else in the starting lineup. And there was really only one other person they were going to turn to unless they were going to make a substitution. So Andrew Nembhard, by the numbers, games 1 through 5, he only defended Brunson for 49 half-court matchups. Brunson had 51.02 player points per 100 possessions over those 5 games with Andrew Nembhard as his primary defender. In game 6, Nembhard defended Brunson for more matchups in game 6 than in the prior 5 games.
How many?
55.
55 burgers, 55 fries, 55 milkshakes. Let's go.
And he only allowed 9.09 player points per 100 possessions. What a crazy turnaround. We are going to look at the highlights, but also, to be weird and show like a body shot of myself right now. If you do think that Andrew had a great defensive performance, there are shirts available about this very topic.
Nobody
Okay.
said it would be Nem easy, baby. Also, like, Nembhard, I don't know. You give me these rundowns before. I've never seen 9 points per 100 possessions. I've never seen that.
On that volume? Yeah.
I've never seen anything like that. That was kind of, last game as I was pitching optimism to you, because like the answer in this game was a little bit like, you guys do need to play better. There are things they had to do, and we talked about some, but you guys do have to play better. Is Pascal and the interaction he got into where he was like, they played harder. And he was like, no, sometimes that is just what it is. It turns out, for Knicks fans who are listening, Pascal wasn't rattled, I suppose. He was just, I guess, kind of like, what's
people
up,
think he was rattled?
That was, they're like, oh yeah, he's rattled. Like,
no, I think he was just bothered by the line of questioning. I don't think he was.
No, I definitely. So, but anyway, I said, like this series could really use a 17-point game from Towns or something like that. And I cited, like, if DeLon Wright can make threes, Obi Toppin is allowed to as well. Did I expect it to be Brunson, who had 19 points on 18 shots? Apparently 9 points per 100 possessions coming into the Nembhard matchup, where Nembhard was able to phase through walls seemingly at will to collect his body on one side and then, or to disperse it on one side and collect it on the other. I think there were some Lionel Messi highlights that have Roy Hudson, I think his name was Ray Hudson, going, Lionel Messi, talking about him doing that. It's just his defense. We'll watch it. I don't need to talk. We'll watch
it. Let's watch it. Very first possession, steal, layup. Then, gut Chicago is a difficult action to chase through.
Mm-hmm.
Brunson and the Knicks go to that a lot. He gets all the way through it. And then one of Nembhard's best skills that he's always had is his ability to defend with his chest, with his arms out, and then also gets the tap out there. This one, he tried to go to his tap from behind, and Miles Turner better, providing high wall.
I was really happy with Miles' defense on that one. And also Miles, when he got the switch on Brunson, and Brunson killed his dribble and had to pass out, I was like, whoa! That's when I was like, they're going to win this game.
And very quietly, Tyrese had some activity on defense as well that, like, just as a compare and contrast, like some of the time when we've been pointing out Brunson's show coverage and being like,
yes,
that's very flat. That's not the best angle. Like, you're not really helping Mikal Bridges very much right here. Tyrese helped out Nembhard a couple of times by taking very sharp angles that actually did deter Jalen Brunson. And there on the pass out, he actually deflected it.
I'm sure you'll have it, but like when they jumped him, and got that steal out for the Nembhard layup was great. But also, like, Tyrese had that one, I can't remember if it was a show or a blitz, where he had to drop, or it would have been a show, where he dropped back out of it and stole the entry pass into the middle of the floor, just like extended his arm into the air. It was Tyrese, very strong defensive game, I thought. I wrote as much in my piece, but I did think it was like massive for him, although we're focusing on Nembhard.
Then another gut handoff that he deflects from Brunson there. This is like, you're just completely absorbing every step and counter that Brunson has there with his chest again. And then this is the one that I really like too, because he didn't get over the top and get back in front every time, but when he didn't, he cracks down on Mitchell Robinson. And then watch this box out. This is a guard. And he's actually pushing Mitchell Robinson down toward the baseline when he had to go to that veer switch. He veer switches several times in this game and almost stayed back in the play every time. Here he's on Karl Anthony Towns. Then when Brunson drives Siakam, he uses his offhand and knocks it away on the drive. That one, in case people, like I said, like shirts. He tried to pull the chair on Jalen Brunson right there. Miles Turner rotates to help, and then he veer switches and steals the pass to Mitchell Robinson in front of him. This is the one that we're talking about with some of the hedges, or not quite. Yeah, right there, where he dropped back and stole that entry pass. And then this is just a repeat in case people want to watch the pressure between Siakam and Nembhard again. Feel free.
By the way, I watched this in slow motion. This ended up being Knicks' ball, but it actually was out off of Brunson. It rolled out and touched the line just very barely before touching Nembhard's foot. So it could have been 7 steals, dude.
And then I don't actually have the beginning of this clip, but Nembhard picked him up the full length of the court, and it started in the left corner. Then Brunson goes to the right side, right wing here, and then Nembhard's going to chase him over the top there, all the way into the left corner. So he's almost tracked him through every inch of the court until Brunson finally gets off the ball there. And then this is going to be the steal on the hedge. Again, a very harsh angle from Tyrese to actually deter back toward half court, which, talking about compare and contrasting, at the end of his first full season with the Pacers, I got asked somewhat about his defense, and they weren't using a lot of show coverage back then because somewhat it was a younger roster. They had made a lot of changes to the defense. It was a lot of switching, and I was like, I think they're going to have to do a lot more show and recover with him moving forward. And when he does, it can't be, to quote what I said about Brunson, it needs to be a lot more show and not so much quick. It can't just be a hand wave. And now you're seeing, Tyrese actually get up clear to half court and actually be redirecting to some extent with a negative dribble. And then this is just the last one where it's just a Nembhard picks up an illegal screen.
Hell yeah. That play where Tyrese jumps him. Before I covered the Pacers game last night, I was doing a film room scout, a live stream on Colin Murray Boyles, who's considered probably, I think, consensus a top 3 defender from the draft class. And the exact same play that Haliburton made, I was running the tape, and CMB did that on Jeremiah Fears, one of the best guards from the class. And I was raving about it. I was like, that's his athleticism, man. That's the ability to read the play, to get out. And it literally was like a shot-for-shot recreation that Tyrese was able to perform what CMB did. And it's Jeremiah Fears, it's Jalen Brunson. I was just like, wow. I was so impressed with Tyrese. And, of course, more so with Andrew. But, yep.
Just to reinforce, there actually were more Nembhard highlights, just like as we had already pointed out with this double and then taking away the clear-out cut from Josh Hart as well, that, like, even when he wasn't guarding Jalen Brunson, he was still making a consistent impact very early on when Nesmith was still on Brunson. Low man rotation to contest against Mikal Bridges. Like, he guarded Brunson, he contests against Mikal Bridges. There, he knows when to help off of Brunson and steals it from Mikal Bridges on the double team from the low side. Takes the charge against Josh Hart in transition, and then also defending OG Anunoby swims the post so that Miles can get that steal. So kind of like after the one podcast when I pointed out, like, Pascal Siakam scored in a different way against all 5 Knicks starters and Mitchell Robinson. Nembhard got a stop against almost every significant rotation player for the Knicks in a different way.
He is all of his talents are a little bit hidden He's deceptively like one of the strongest lower half guys in the NBA. It shows up in his ability to like stay on balance and to decel on the other end. Hands are
And to
incredible.
push Mitchell Robinson out of bounds.
Yes, yes. To get lower because he is lower, to win the center of gravity battle, and to keep that leverage is incredible. But also on top of all of that, it's like, yes, the hands, but he doesn't quit a play. A lot of players will do the first half of what he did and pat themselves on the back like that's the right play. But he'll like take pulling the chair on Brunson and then stealing the pass that's going out to the short corner on the opposite side of the floor is like, how the hell did he get here? The Knicks probably felt like there was two of him on the floor because Brunson probably thought he got clear of a screen, looked back, and he's on his tail. He's like, man, I thought you caught that screen, where he shows double and still manages to recover out to like a place on the floor 9 feet away for a steal. It's just constantly appearing in places. And that's the worst thing. Many people listening to this will have played basketball. You and I have both played basketball. There's nothing worse because when you know a guy is there, it's great. You can deal with what's in front of you. There's nothing worse than a defender who just shows up all the time. And you're like, you're still here, man. What the hell? And that's what Nembhard did. He just kept showing up.
He's kind of like walking through a haunted house or going on a haunted house ride where things just keep
Yeah,
popping up as the car turns.
exactly.
But the
He's
other thing that
a jump scare defender.
exactly. The other thing then after, like I said, we're mirroring the trajectory of the regular season for the Pacers. Pascal Siakam carrying early, being solid throughout. Andrew Nembhard changing the complexion of the game with his defense at the point of attack, and then Tyrese playing as an all-NBA defender to close out the game or all-NBA player to close out the season and close out the game. Beating the pressure. The thing that stood out is the pressure for the Knicks wasn't quite as good in this game. Number one. And part of the reason why it wasn't is because the Pacers were beating that pressure with the pass early, often. They had 26 transition possessions in this game. That's the fifth most of any game for the Pacers this season. More telling, 8 transition possessions following a made shot, which is the most for the Pacers of any game this season, and also 14 pass aheads in transition, which was the third most of any game this season. We know that Tyrese likes the hit ahead pass, but it felt like a very deliberate strategy to me that guys were running out as moving targets so that he would be able to throw those as a counter for how much more Mikal Bridges had been face guarding him in prior games, especially getting out quickly after the makes for the Knicks. Pascal Siakam was probably at the forefront of that more than about anybody. So like, I'm not really going to talk over the top of this, but if you want to talk about any of that, what you noticed in transition from either side, we can while this runs in the background. These are all the pass aheads that they had in transition throughout the game.
Yeah, this is a little bit like we see this with Obi Toppin. That's why Obi Toppin was, we call him the bellwether of hot girl basketball, is because he so often is the guy getting out. And this is, Pascal Siakam over his career, I think is probably one of the best transition players in all of basketball over that stretch. It makes sense that he is the guy on the receiving end of the Tyrese Haliburton of it all. He was incredibly impressive. And like this is part of why it felt like watching Pascal was so impressive in this game, because not only is he, of course, playing against Cat, taking that matchup. No, it's not just that he is a guy who is, taking a lot of these difficult shots in the half court and having to create as like a big. A lot of bigs don't have to create, and Pascal occupied the role of shutting down an all NBA center on one side and then doing like wing creation on the other. It's rare. And also being the number one like run out outlet. And obviously Obi found his way in this game, and especially towards the end, he and Tyrese started percolating like crazy. But this starts with Tyrese's willingness to be a guy who, I mean, you talked about it when Tyrese, I think you said it was when it was his first game as a Pacer, and you're like, oh, they're going to play fast. And you're like, I wonder if Rick's, tendencies as a coach or Tyrese's tendencies as a player went out, and Tyrese's did. And then years later, you're looking at a team that is like, go, go, go. Obviously, Obi does a great job of running out. The team does it. But the fact that Pascal was the guy who beat everyone down the floor repeatedly, despite all the other things, I was like, the stamina it was pretty incredible. And Tyrese always having the eyes to look up and ahead. It's a fun team. They have a unique stamp on their play style.
As I was watching this, although I did not create a compilation, shout out to Thomas Bryant as well, who could also be seen running out in some of those possessions, and also just coming in after not playing at all in this series and just banging 3 corner threes
You know what
against.
I loved? Everyone went back to LeBron James' record-breaking bucket because it's the picture of him taking the shot, and you see Thomas Bryant calling for the ball. He's like, "I got a mismatch, man. Mouse in the house." I believe it was Shea. He had SGA on him, and finals rematch: SGA versus Thomas Bryant. Let's
Yeah,
go.
exactly. But seriously though, and some of the things that you saw from Thomas Bryant spacing to the corner was like this is the give and take between playing he and Tony Bradley, because
Mhm,
there were times where like yes, Tony Bradley's boxing Mitchell Robinson out better than what Thomas Bryant was doing, but some of the overpassing that led to the loss in game 3 was in part a product of the fact that Tony Bradley was occupying the dunker spot when the Pacers aren't really used to that. And this game, they're
mhm.
getting out and running, drawing in that defense, and then he's hitting corner threes at the time when they needed him to. So like I said, I'm not going to show the 3 corner threes that he made, but big contributions from their backup center as well, which is almost a mirror of the season as well too, because they had another backup center go down with an injury, which was something that happened repeatedly
Yep.
throughout the regular season, and they needed Thomas Bryant to show up when he did, just like what happened midway through the year. So, other thing that I want to talk about really quick with regard to Tyrese is some of the other things that they did just with him individually, in addition to the advanced passes to beat some of the pressure. This is Siakam setting a screen clear back at the Knicks free throw line so that you can try to throw the ball out into space and shed some of the pressure from Mikal Bridges, but also really good from Tyrese to stick with it and get him on his back and actually use that hostage dribble when he threw the ball out in front of him as well. That wasn't something that we were seeing a ton when they were showing him pressure in New York. This is actually back to game 5 when a couple people asked me from the Knicks side of things, like, well, we've been wanting them to put OG Anunoby onto Tyrese, like what they did against Cade Cunningham and in the prior rounds that the Knicks had been in. And I said, well, if they do, I think that they'll just keep going to the 77 skip action where Tyrese can get a get and then stack actions on top of that. And then they ended up getting, the Brunson Cat matchup that they wanted. The only thing is that the Pacers didn't shoot the ball particularly well in New York. Well, when the Knicks went to putting OG Anunoby onto Tyrese Haliburton again, that is, in fact, the very play that they called when that matchup was made. So Ben Shepherd setting what's effectively like a rip DHO, him getting the get action, and then Tyrese finding Miles under the rim. But something very quietly, you said people don't want to necessarily hear people talk over the top of the highlights, but quietly, the impact that Nembhard made on defense also made an impact on offense, because watch Mikal Bridges guarding Nembhard in the corner. He's so infatuated with giving Nembhard a little shove in the chest and practically face guarding him out of bounds that he's not at all in position to tag when Tyrese draws Cat in the drop coverage.
Also, Brunson headbutted him, dude.
Yeah, that was a little
Now,
strange. They didn't show what led to that. They were just
yeah.
like, here's this highlight of Nembhard being headbutted. I'm like,
And like Brunson, he comes across as like a really well measured, like
mm-hmm.
kind, like always uber respectful player, and everything I've ever seen from him. But he does like to get chippy in physical matchups. I've not seen it escalate to that though. Give him a little Zinedine Zidane, dude.
Then the other thing that I felt showed up a lot is that they were always ready to be screening much more in this game than in game 5 with either Cat or Jalen Brunson. It's pretty much like Tyrese has the option to go off of either one of them in almost an extended horn set so that he could get downhill, especially late in the game, all the way to the rim there with his right. And then also, it's almost like you're watching an extended, like another 3/4 court screen from Siakam, but it's just an entire maze of picks where they're just going to keep screening for him over and over again. It's almost like an extended horns twist there, where it's the show from Jalen Brunson in one direction, then going back against Cat in the other direction to find Obi for the dunk. So there were more things that they did that I kind of expected. The extended screens for Tyrese, the 77 action against OG, and then also just being a lot more active of being like, hey, let's stick with the bread and butter of just going at Towns and Brunson as much as we possibly
Yeah.
can.
What's the salesman mantra? Always be closing. Oh, ABC, baby. Always be greening. It's just you gotta shake loose, dude. Careening, let's say.
Sure. So that is what I had from Game 6. The Pacers are advancing to the NBA Finals. Samson and I both picked the Pacers to advance to the NBA Finals, as you might recall. This isn't a prediction-heavy pod, but the one time that we did predict it correctly. I have other plans for the back end of this podcast, but if there was anything else that you wanted to bring up from Game 6, I'm certainly willing to discuss.
Not from Game 6. I think we talked about the big motivating factors there. Also of note, Aaron Nesmith, rest that ankle, brother.
Yes.
Like, he gets a little time off. I think it's pretty clear he was going through it. Like, he was having a tough time. I don't know how he managed to come back. Like, Game 4, he was quite good. And then I think just the flights back and forth are probably what did him in. However,
travel does not affect people's play, Samson.
Oh, yeah.
That doesn't lead to struggles at all when you have an injury.
Yeah.
Don't forget that.
Something like that. Looking forward to Nesmith. I will say I'm a transplant to this community, right? Miles Turner, I remember from his rookie season where he played the Raptors and hit a lot of mid-range jumpers in a playoff series, and I was just like, wow, he's such a great shooter.
And had to start at the 4 next to Jan Mahinmi as a rookie.
Yeah, and start at the 4, and he would have like 12 points on 10 shots, and then I'd be like, oh, I guess it wasn't that bad that he hit mid-range jumpers. That was my introduction to him. And then he was the desired and lusted after player for Raptors fans for forever because he guards the rim and he can shoot, and everybody wanted him to play next to Pascal Siakam in a Raptors jersey. And then I learned about the Legos, and then I remember listening to Jalen and Jacoby. They were at the draft that he was at. This is the first thing. And Miles Turner, they asked him about sliding into DMs, and he said, head first, dude. And I was like, hell yeah, this guy rocks. He comes across as like such a fun player and man. And 10 years in Indiana, he's the longest tenured guy by some measure. He writes the Players Tribune article. He's part of the city. He's the one who survived all of these regimes. He's seen it a lot. It's cool to see him in the finals with this team. It's pretty nice.
And there's a lot of alternate pathways there of ways that things in his career could have gone, especially when you're considering, and I was part of this, the summer when they gave the offer sheet to DeAndre Ayton, which was a break from how ownership has operated with the Pacers in the past. Like, I understood why they did, because watching Tyrese, because of Tyrese's game being built around, he likes to come off of picks and survey. He has the floater. He has the fake finger roll. He has the skip pass to the opposite corner. I'm like, somebody that applies more pressure going toward the basket might make a little more sense for him as a roll man. Also, Ayton was terrific in transition with the Phoenix Suns. It made a lot of sense to me.
He's also quickly too. Ayton is like a terrific short mid-range like shot maker. It would make it's good that it didn't happen, but it would make sense
in part because Miles was a magnet to popping. And under Nate McMillan, he was a magnet to popping to 2. And then under Nate Bjorkgren, he started going to 3 a little bit more. And then under Rick Carlisle, he goes to 3 a lot, obviously. But it was a question mark for me headed into that season after Phoenix matched that offer sheet of like, how are these two going to build chemistry together and who's exactly going to bend to who? Because Miles wants to pop, Tyrese wants to survey. Typically, if you're a pop guy, that melds better with like a Ja Morant who's really going to be attacking the rim. And as it turns out, Miles started rolling a lot more, which is something that he had to adapt to. And certainly it helps when you're playing with a creator. You know, Tyrese is like a silver spoon when he's feeding other people, certainly. But that's something that's built with his game. The low post stuff's never going to be a massive feature, but I can tell people that, like, if you go back and watch him, like, as a rookie and his first early seasons in the career when he would get a switch, if you switch the pick and pop, that was pretty much it. Teams were cross-matching a lot. They were putting their centers onto Thaddeus Young, whether it was Rudy Gobert, whether it was Joel Embiid, and now he plays with somebody in Pascal Siakam who really compliments him when he sees those cross matches. So Miles, in a lot of respects, while he didn't have, the best statistical series here, and there's things that certainly can be pointed to, especially in the last game, he makes their starting lineup make a lot of sense in ways
Yeah.
that might not have made sense when they signed Ayton to that offer sheet, in part because of improvements that he individually made. So yeah, definitely cool to see him play his whole tenure with the Pacers and get to go clear to the NBA Finals with one franchise.
You said he was a magnet for popping.
Mm-hmm.
Tyrese is a magnate for offense. Let's go.
All right, so what I have planned over the back end is normally this mailbag would have been done. I try to get them done by the end of May, but I felt because the Pacers were in the middle of a series, some of the questions that were asked might get dated very quickly, and then I knew people would probably want to ask about OKC, but I'm like, I'm not going to answer questions about OKC until they're definitively in the playoffs, and we're not doing that preview yet today, but we are going to answer a few of the questions that were sent in via patron-only direct messages to me as a wrap up to what this series was. So hopefully, you'll get into that. First question. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. I really do. Tiklung Chan. I'm curious what your thoughts are about the various tracking data based advanced stats that are used in the NBA, EPM, RAPM, Darko, etc. I personally find them very interesting, both from a purely academic perspective of how they're calculated and from an analytic and even theoretically predictive perspective of trying to quantify the impact that individual players have on various aspects of the game. I've noticed that the other basketball analysts and content creators that I follow tend to reference and use them a lot more than you and Samson do. Your analysis seems to be heavily based on actually studying the film along with relevant tracking data instead of any of these condensed impact metrics. So, what do you think about the value and role of these models when it comes to basketball analysis, particularly of evaluating the strengths and weaknesses of individual players and teams?
So when I say this, I don't mean to cast dispersions anywhere. But people who use a lot of these, they are kind of like cheat sheets, and they're created for that. That's why they're created too, is people want to take all the available numbers and kind of be able to spit out something that says what players are good. At its best, I think it directs people towards unseen things to look for in the film. And at its worst, I think these numbers are used as catch-alls to argue and uplift and downplay, and like they just become a substitute for people who don't watch. You see it happen all the time on Twitter. And I think people who have a more vast league to cover have to rely on this stuff a little bit more often. And also, if you subject yourself to the whims of like audience capture and you're trying to get more popular, giving people easy answers to a very complex question in basketball and who is good and why, saying like, here's the number, I give the numbers, I'll keep giving you the numbers, provides a lot of value. We saw it happen with there's many different people who just like are like, I give you numbers. Now they have value in that they collect things, they can show unseen things, and they certainly do. However, I think a lot of people use them, but it's best to use these numbers when you actually understand how they're weighted and when you understand the formulas. Now, just passively, I think is fine. Like, do whatever you want, right? And providing, like, if Caitlin and I want to say that Pascal Siakam had an unbelievable EPM with the Pacers, then you have to quibble with, like, why was it not that good with the Raptors? And you can't answer that without watching film. Film is, if you can read it or watch it correctly, is like always the answer. And if you really love BPM, which is heavily weighted towards favoring bigs, and BPM has this weird thing where it weighs assists for centers if they come at a high enough rate at a similar level to blocks. And then you get Nikola Jokic as the greatest defensive big man of all time, according to defensive BPM. There's just holes and stuff. So I think they are cool, and there are good attempts at trying to capture things. However, why Caitlin and I do this is I think there's a bit of basketball purism to what we do, but also Caitlin and I center ourselves on one team each, which means we watch that one team, which means we focus very hard, and which means we watch the film and talk about that. If you're trying to catch up, catch-all numbers are a good place to direct you, but too many people think about them as the answer. Too many people put them side by side and say, this guy's is better than this guy's. And it's nonsensical, especially in an argumentative fashion. As a interest thing, whatever, have fun.
I don't look at all in one metrics for defense, barely at all. I think the stats are too context driven. or don't apply to players who aren't the driving forces of their team's defense. And if you are the driving force of your team's defense, that's already probably going to pop in the film and in other non-catch-all metric stats. So as far as role players, I'm not going to look at it for that probably much at all, to be frank. I'm always going to look at the film first. That's just my order of operations. And
Mhm.
then I will look at everything else after that. And if there's a massive discrepancy in the numbers from what I'm seeing, then I'm going to go on a hunt and search for the reason of what's causing that discrepancy. Because sometimes it might not be that the San Antonio Spurs defense is worse with Kawhi Leonard on the floor. It might be because of Kawhi Leonard being displaced out of the defense because his defense is in fact so good. And I know that there was some tricky things like that with Wemby this year too, as far as what numbers looked like with him, despite the fact that you could watch it and be like, no, this guy might be like the spookiest rim defender ever in terms of turning people back from the rim. So, and that stuff's interesting because if you didn't go look at that number and you'd be like, why does this look like this? And actually, this makes Kawhi seem even cooler than what I even thought that he might be. Those types of things are interesting, but I will never lead numbers first. It will always be film first, and then the numbers will contextualize what I'm seeing in the film or redirect me if it's
Well, I'll say
tremendously different from what I'm seeing.
numbers are great when they accurately describe something. I love accurate statistics. Love them. Like, really love them. I don't like inaccurate statistics. And also, like, I'll just add that this type of stuff, I understand why players are averse to it. Some guy sat and created a formula that now devalues you, and you can't even understand why. If I'm a player, I'm like, that's bullshit. You didn't earn that analysis. You didn't earn this at all. And you're using it to say I'm not good at things. I understand why people are cagey of it, especially since there's so many different variations of it now. And they, again, as an interesting, and some front offices do value this stuff quite heavily. It's everyone's choice to how they want to do it, but like they often are presented as answers when they are should just be like interesting things that point you towards looking further. But a lot of people use them as answers because a lot of people want shortcuts. And as a fan, shortcuts are whatever. You do whatever you want. But as analysis, if you can avoid them, you should, I think.
And the tracking data is a little bit different, which even sometimes I will align and match up with, you
Hmm.
know, what do the film clips align with what the numbers are indicating here? Are there things that I think that are missing maybe from the tracking? But like if I'm looking up numbers about why Tyrese doesn't barely turn the ball over and what his average pass length is and other things, that's just contextualizing what you're already seeing, which is a little bit different than what's being asked with regard to
Well, I'll say
actual
quickly,
catch-alls. Yeah.
part of we've talked about Pascal, like part of the fan base that like tried to run Pascal out of town and constantly was saying like he's not good, was using catch-alls constantly to be like he's not good anymore, he's washed. And that wasn't correct.
Would appear not.
Like you can't just throw box score plus minus and be like this guy's good, this guy's bad. And I suspect that a lot of the people you follow don't do that, but I would be like, if someone is doing that constantly, I would be kind of like, why is this how you look at basketball? I have this great tweet that it's like a dad takes his son or daughter to the game and says, that's where they make the numbers, you know?
The next question, Zach Coakley. For anyone interested in basketball analytics or basketball analysis as a career specifically, what would be a good starting point? I've been a big Pacers fan for about 12 years, and your work has genuinely gotten me more invested than ever. I love talking and listening to others talk ball. How did you get your start?
So for me, I played club basketball. I got to travel to the United States to play basketball as a Midwestern Canadian kid. And so I had good coaches. Big shout out Trent Salmon. Big shout out David Harmon. Big shout out my dad, who didn't know anything about basketball but had to coach my team. So I ended up drawing up the sets for our offense because he didn't really know anything about it. That gave me the background I needed to understand basketball. And then I was lucky that I reached out to my longtime nemesis, Blake Murphy and asked like how he got his start. And I pitched, because he was the editor of Raptors Republic, and I pitched this piece to him about how Kyle Lowry was, kind of like how important he was to Canadian, or how important Vince Carter was to Canadian basketball, which I had written for my girlfriend at the time for her kinesiology class, and I just repurposed it into a Raptors Republic article. And then I ended up writing like Kyle Lowry is underrated piece, and I ended up living with Blake on his couch for a month too. He's my nemesis, by the way, an enemy of mine. But it was just reaching out and having an opportunity to write for a publication. And I will say, a lot of people are very, likes and retweets and exposure makes you think that like you just have to do it for free on Twitter, that you should make Twitter threads. I still believe that you should try, like if you can, try and write something in article form or do in video form and try and get paid for your work and try to have it go up on a publication. That kind of stuff is really important. But you just got to make it. I hate to sound like content creator brained, but you just have to, if you believe you have unique insights and you want to like cut your teeth, you just got to try. And that's what you have to do.
Mine is similar. I would say it probably started between my freshman and sophomore year in high school. It's funny because I don't have the paper anymore, because strangely enough, my folder as a senior was the only person's writing portfolio that went missing. So I didn't get to keep any of my work from my entire 4-year high school career. But I was assigned to write an essay about where we saw ourselves in 10 years, as many people are when they start high school. And I remember writing vividly that I would be in Bristol, Connecticut working for ESPN.
Wow.
And at the time, I was playing high school girls basketball. Basketball was everything to me. My dad was a high school basketball coach in the boys program at the same school. And so almost most of my life was spent in gyms somewhere, whether that was at my own games, my own practices, his practices, going on scouting trips with him. I was always hopping in the car to go. So I was obsessed with improving as a player. And wherever 2 or more coaches were gathered, I was always listening in, and I'm sure it was really annoying to my dad and his fellow coaches on these trips, where sometimes I thought like, well, I'll listen, but I'm a 13-year-old girl and I have a great idea about this. And so I was soaking up as much knowledge as I could. So like you, that's where the foundation of the knowledge, I suppose, came from, if people think that I have knowledge of basketball at a respectable level. And during that period of my life, though, I mean, not to make it too emo here, but I did have a coach tell me that he preferred to coach girls basketball because they didn't know enough about the game to argue with him. That conditioned me as a player, and it also changed, it genuinely changed the approach of what I was doing for the remainder in high school, along with other things that happened in conjunction with that. So when my playing days didn't go as planned, I kind of abandoned writing as well. Other aspirations, I didn't join the pub staff. I focused heavily on academics because I needed an academic scholarship to go to college. Changed my intended course of study. And while I was amid pursuing a different life track, I really sensed a void, and that I wasn't doing the things that I necessarily envisioned for myself anymore. So long story short, finished college, was drifting a bit. And my sister was like, I think you need to get back to the things that you always loved doing and let go of some of that. So I started submitting fan posts at Indy Cornrows many, many, many years ago during the Paul George, Lance Stevenson, David West, Roy Hibbert era. And eventually my work got saw there. Tom Lewis, who now has the Indy Cornrows Substack, was like, hey, we'll start letting you write pieces on the main page. And I ended up getting back to both of my first loves, which were basketball and writing, via encouragement from my sister, obviously. So I acquired certain skills, I would say, from studying history in college, certainly, that helped me do research, helped me condense ideas, helped me magnify details that I might not have had if my life took a different path. But that's my very circuitous journey. So I guess my advice would be similar to Samson's, that if this is something that you're really into, while it's unfortunate that you're probably not going to get paid for the amount of work reasonably that you're going to do, is to find a platform like what I did, where you're writing fan posts and you can have that platform to get the work seen. And hopefully, if I mean, this isn't the best way to put it, because Twitter's a different platform than it was whenever we both started writing. People will see it and then it can grow from there. When the work is good, people tend to see it, and hopefully that could then translate into something else. But that is what my winding path was.
And I'll say quickly, I can't put any Pacer stuff on Raptors Republic, but my email is on my Twitter, and if anybody listening wants to try and write something, Raptors Republic takes that kind of stuff, and you can just email it to me, and that's a great way to just like I'll talk to Lewis, and Lewis will not only look at what you wrote, but he will give you feedback. And that's another thing. I guess that's the next question about why we work together and all that kind of stuff that we'll get into. But like the writers that I know, Blake could have been a lawyer and like as a degree in business. Caitlin obviously history and like higher education for sure. Lewis has a master's in history as well. I read his thesis on a commune in Paris, and Evan is a coach at a very successful school in the States as well. And what I did was I just worked with people who I thought were exemplary. And so, yeah. And a lot of the people who got hired off of draft Twitter initially were like professionals in something else. It's good to have other things. Don't ask me if I do, though. I'm just a lowly carpenter before getting into all this.
Next question, James. Really enjoy the video pods. How did you and Samson come to collaborate with one another? What's your favorite thing about working with Samson and vice versa? I'll answer this from my side first, and then if you want to contradict me afterwards,
Sure.
you can. So I guess I would say that this particular collaboration probably occurred when Pascal was traded to the Pacers. We both agreed, like, I was pretty sure the trade was going to happen. Samson was pretty sure the trade was going to happen. And I was like, I'll do your live show when it does happen. And then the day after, like, why don't you come over and we'll do a video watching film of Pascal a little bit more in depth after that. At the end of it, Samson kind of made a joke and was like, oh, I'm going to make watching the Pacers in the playoffs a little hobby. And then I made a joke and I was like, I'll bring you on to do off day pods. And then like a couple weeks later, Samson texted me and was like, I wasn't joking. And I was like, I wasn't joking either. Like we could definitely do that. And so fortunately for me, the Raptors have not been a very good basketball team the last two playoff runs, which allowed Samson time to do this. It is funny in retrospect because when I announced our collaboration at the beginning of the year, I was like, hey, the Pacers think that continuity is the best path to improvement for them, and I'm going to follow suit. So Samson got to do it a little bit more full time. But I think, I mean, he and I had already collaborated many times on podcasts before then, but it was always me doing stuff at his website because I didn't really have the agency to be inviting him to do things with me in the other direction. So I guess that's my answer to the first part of the question. But if you think that that came about in a different way than that, you can.
Yeah.
I mean, it's you're the person who agreed to come on and do all of this. So
the very first, so basically, Evan Gualberto had like now there's big conglomerate highlight channels, but for a long time, Evan Gualberto had like the number one NBA highlight channel and specialized highlight packages in the NBA. And I watched his videos for forever. And then one time I was watching his video when I was like, this was still my job. I was living in Mexico at the time. And I saw that he had a Twitter, and I was like, I want to talk to Evan about basketball. And so I messaged him on Twitter. Now, of course, there's a joke around this that, Caitlin and Evan have laugh at, but, and Evan and I talked together. We talked a lot of basketball for like months. And then Evan and I were like, I guess Evan deemed that I was good enough at talking basketball that he would actually do something with. And then we did a podcast together for a couple of years, bouncing around, which if you notice that like Caitlin and I go through film, what Evan and I would do was we would each watch a game of the week and then break down what each team was doing to win basically. And it was really fun, but it was way too much work. And you know what? It was the first podcast of its style. The NBA community wasn't ready for it yet. Okay. It was a little bit too in depth, all that kind of stuff. But what kept popping up, because we love to be able to cite the people who were informing, how we understood a team from like Indiana, for example, and we would cite Caitlin Cooper quite often. And that meant that, we had to have Caitlin on as a guest, and I reached out and asked, and then she said yes. And then the rest is what she said.
okay, so my favorite thing about working with you,
Oh, yeah.
and hopefully you're not going to get super squirmy and
God.
uncomfortable.
Oh, no.
It's gonna be a change from my
Oh Lord.
criticisms of you during banter times.
Mm,
My favorite thing about working with Samson is the same thing I thought of him the first time I listened to him on a podcast with Blake Murphy. There's not a lot of people who can both understand and describe what's happening on a basketball court at the same level as he does, which I think he's equally good at both, which is very rare. I don't generally send him the clips for any of these shows ahead of time. Like, that's what I want people to know. I do send like a basic outline with some numbers so that he can have a background of the things that I'm thinking I'm going to bring up and say, but I don't send him the film. And he's incredibly adept, as I'm sure you can probably all tell now that you know that, at offering commentary and mining gems off the cuff. I don't know a lot of people who could just sit here with me shining up a random clip that he doesn't know is coming and be able to add and layer context on top of that. I mean, of course, he's watched the games, but he doesn't know exactly what I'm going to show. And I also just really enjoy that we get to do this together as friends in the way that we want to do it, because I'm doing this independently. The show gets to be exactly what we want the show to be. So I think that pretty much sums it up.
yeah. For me, my favorite thing is from like a work perspective, I put myself in a what I consider to be a position of learning. When I work with Caitlin, I learn a million things from her every single time. And as she just said, when film comes up, it's like pop quiz. Okay, like straight off the back, see if you can do what's there. But also like Caitlin's incredibly kind and intelligent, and we are two friends who like money gets involved and all this kind of stuff, and there's like trying to organize like a boss work or whatever, and we've been able to navigate all of that without like any problems because like there's a lot of kindness in between and there's a lot of care for the other person's perspective and comfortability and all that kind of stuff. So that's probably my favorite thing, because it's always tough. People do podcasts, people do like people work is work, and this is work, but it's really fun and I learn a lot. And that is why I put myself in the positions of the people I've chosen to work with outside of Trey. Trey doesn't teach me anything, man. We just we did. That's a joke. But anyway, being in a position of learning with someone who's kind and patient to bring me along, top notch, fantastic.
I'm not bringing you along in any way, shape, or form. But okay, so the last question is just for you. For Samson, KF, outside of the different styles and trajectories of the two teams, what's been the biggest difference for you between covering the Pacers and covering the Raptors?
Well, the Pacers had a timeline. I don't know how much older Tyrese is than Scotty, maybe a couple years. The Pacers had a timeline and they wanted to add. The Raptors had a timeline and they didn't. That was a big differentiator there. But I mean, the Darko style is closer to the Pacers style, certainly. The Raptors actually tried to emulate quite a lot of what the Pacers did last year. This year, they're just not as good at it. So I guess that there's that aspect of it. The Raptors actually do quite well against the Pacers for whatever reason that is. The biggest difference, though, is that, and this matters a lot, one team is in the finals and one team won 30 games, dude. You know what I mean? That's a huge difference. And the Raptors really are reeling and have been for a couple years after trying to, save a championship core that won like at a 60 win pace after Kawhi Leonard left. And then, there was the bubble. And obviously there was a lot of focus on Pascal, who due to Canadian like restrictions and laws didn't play basketball for like 4 months or 5 months heading into that session of time. And the Raptors were in like this up and down. They win 48 games, then they win 41. They traded for Jakob. Fred left. The Raptors wanted to pay Fred. Fred left partially because of the makeup of the team personality wise. Extremely reckless use of the term selfishness to capitulate to fan fiction from fans and just lop people up as like everyone who leaves is bad, everyone who stays is good. The Raptors had a lot to sort out, and the Pacers are in the finals. That's a huge difference. I can't say that enough. But the Raptors now are a very happy team, and they are ready to try and turn a corner, and they are very copacetic now. And I think Darko has done a really great job. And even Scotty, I think, has done a really great job of providing positivity for a team that has been in flux. And they're going to try and make the playoffs next year. Like, they're really going to go for it. And I still have to manage to stay on with this Pacers squad somehow for playoff coverage. So we'll see how that goes. But the biggest difference is one team is really good and one team is not.
You didn't answer this question at all. The person said from outside play styles and trajectories of the team. What's the biggest difference?
Okay. Well, I talked about it a little bit, like vibes. I
can interject here while you think about it and say that, like, I think that the Raptors fan base needs to continue to be squarely in support of the Pacers. Obviously, there's a lot of Canadian connections here on both rosters. It's going to be a heavily Canadian-themed NBA Finals, but two small market teams, but two completely polar opposite team building strategies. The Oklahoma City Thunder did a lot of building their team through the draft and pick acquisition, obviously, although they did trade for Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. Both these teams have in common that, hey, when you trade Paul George, somehow you trade Paul George and you trade Domantas Sabonis and you build championship contenders, apparently. Yep. They will both have that when they get to whichever one raises a banner. But beside the point is that the Pacers' current means of getting to the NBA Finals is what I think that the Raptors are somewhat aspiring toward. At least my outside opinion of that is that, having a core, but also being able to pivot off of that core, which is what the Pacers did, making a lot of smart trades. Obviously, Andrew Nembhard factors huge throughout this podcast, and they did draft him, and he became the first player since Miles Turner that they themselves drafted that they signed to a second contract. But the players that they drafted outside of those two aren't heavily factoring in the top, 6 of the rotation here. Not necessarily. The rest of it is because they made trades of people, whether that's Malcolm Brogdon, Karis LeVert, Domantas Sabonis, who are all on very cost-effective contracts that made that they were going to get a lot in return. And they're also a very prudent front office in terms of their core was very purgatorial too. And they waited until they thought that the right deals were going to be in place for them, and they ended up being there. So I think some of that is probably in line with the Raptors. Although, like I said, this person just wanted to know, I think from like the fan base standpoint, what's the biggest difference between covering the Raptors and the Pacers? I don't know. I could be misinterpreting the question, but given that they said other than trajectory and
I think, well, the biggest difference is that I know when I do the basketball she wrote work that I am doing unquestionably the best work possible. That's the difference, I think, is that I think that when Caitlin and I do a podcast together, I don't think anything sniffs it. That's the difference, probably. And that's a cool thing. Is like I know, because I'm doing this with Caitlin, I know that this is the best analysis podcast for whatever game we covered. Like, it's without comparison. It's a cool thing. It's a really cool thing.
I think that's probably true of most of the podcasts that you do, but I'm glad that's the last question because I'm supposed to carry on after these very nice things were said about me on camera. Like, it's gonna be.
We got Glottis's heart back. Manny went into the woods, got it out of that spider's web.
People want to know: have you considered downloading Grim Fandango?
It's a consideration.
You have several off days in a row.
No, I'm not going to squeeze it in the off days. I'm trying to climb a V6, dude. I'm working on the off days. I'm going to the climbing gym. I had a new record on the campus board the other day. It's like, I was like, wow, my pulling power has increased by so much. But yeah, I'm trying to climb a V6. So maybe at some point, and I'm trying to bench press 2 plates. I'm trying to accomplish these goals. before I'm 30, I guess. If that matters. I actually don't care about that. Yeah. Grim Fandango might happen during the summer, though. It's possible. I saw a very short video essay on it, and it intrigued me to no end. I was like, wow, these characters seem really well thought out.
See, sometimes my recommendations are actually on point. Sometimes I do have intriguing interests.
We'll see.
I did like your book recommendation, especially at the time when I read it. So I think you have good taste.
I have
The
great
one thing that
taste.
you recommended.
My taste is actually like the number one defining feature of my life. Like in friends, in company I keep, in media I consume, I'm knocking it out of the park, man. I am the tastemaker of my own life, and I've curated something special. There's things that are not that great, but if you curate properly, and this is kind of like the Pacers team building process, is they're like, Neesmith seems awesome. Nembhard seems awesome. Pascal Siakam, he seems awesome. You know, having good taste is super duper. Miss Cooper.
It's no. I really hate it when people say that something gives them the ick, but that really gives me the ick. I really don't like it.
Yeah.
Some way, shape, or form, I'm going to find something that you find icky, and then I'm going to start repeating it all the time.
You probably have to find something political. You'd have to take a stance that I found egregious, and I'd just be like,
I don't think I would have any of those stances to take.
Yeah, I don't think
that
so
me
either.
taking them would make me feel icky, but I could bring up your text habits again. I bet that would.
They're fleshed out. I'm a bad texter. I had a Hall of Fame text yesterday, though. I sent you a picture of a creamsicle, and then when they won, I texted you. I said, "Told you."
Right. You were a lot more active in the messaging. That's another thing. You're gearing up as the Pacers get closer to a championship. You just keep improving, as do they.
Exactly.
But anyways, that answers what mailbag questions that weren't OKC relevant. I guess they were more us relevant. Hopefully people enjoy the us of this podcast. In addition to the Pacers, what turned out to be me talking over highlights, which you may or may not have liked, depending upon how you curate your interests. But I think that's going to wrap up what we have for this one. We will have an Oklahoma City preview before game 1 of the finals. I'm not exactly sure what day that will be, but if you subscribe to the channel or subscribe to patreon.com/basketballshewrote, you won't have to come back and check because you'll automatically be notified or have it delivered, sent to you in your inbox. So that seems like the easy solution.
Yeah. Also, if you're a fan of this podcast, go bug some big podcasters that you should have these guys on their podcast. Zach Lowe should be having Caitlin Cooper on his podcast, okay? The big podcasts should be featuring this woman here. And if you'd like to support this woman here, this man here, you can subscribe at Basketball She Wrote is the Patreon that is created by the best basketball analyst in the world, the best basketball writer in the world. I happen to be there as well. You can support us by subscribing. Even just having it sent to your email is totally fine too. I'll be writing on every finals game. We'll be talking about every single one. I don't know what else is happening, but great coverage. Caitlin, anything else?
Oh, I was just going to let you know that somebody right away after you wrote your gamer last night said, it was a blessed day.
Wasn't it? Wasn't it? All right. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe. It helps out the channel. It helps more people see this and helps support us more tangibly. We appreciate you very much. Thank you for tuning in. And whether you got into this in the morning or at night, from myself and Caitlin, have a blessed day and goodbye.